Chapter 12, Part 4. Okay. Invitations to meals chez Sarah were sought after by many and afforded only to the choice. Her guest lists, still kept by the aging Emile, must have read like pages from an international who's who, with such names as Clemenceau, D'Annunzio, and the politician Aristide Briand. And right out of the Almanach de Gotha came repeatedly the name of that extravagant dandy, the Marquis Boni de Castellane, then at the height of his costly glory, made possible by the American dollars of his dismal wife, Anna Gould. In 1904, Sarah put on a play written by Boni called La Festine de la Mort, which apparently didn't make enough of an impression for any biographer to mention. The United States Ambassador, Myron T. Herrick, was a regular also. Oh, and so, whenever he came to Paris, was Theodore Roosevelt. Bernhardt and Roosevelt had been great friends for years. Her admiration for him was boundless, and she announced to one group of acquaintances, "That man and I, together we could rule the world." Members of her court were ever present, and she welcomed rising young artists and writers, such as the dancer Ida Rubinstein or the exquisite poetess Anna de Noailles, Noailles, whose entry into a room has been described as that of an oriental princess descending from her palanquin. For years, Pierre Loti had tried to gain entrée into the house on the Boulevard Pereire. The gifted and eccentric author had adored La Divine ever since he had seen her in Hernani at the age of 27. He was then in the Navy, and his cabin on the vessel Moselle, cruising the Orient, was cluttered with photographs of Doña Sol. During the 90s, after Loti was well established as a successful novelist, he wrote Madame Sarah a small masterpiece in the form of a letter of admiration, which she never bothered to answer, and may well have never bothered to read. Then he dedicated a book to her, and she paid no attention to that either. One day her major domo announced that a Japanese gentleman was calling, and Sarah, her curiosity piqued, told Emile to show him in. The Japanese gentleman was Loti, in elaborate makeup and kimono. Sarah sent him about his business. Loti finally crashed the gates by having himself rolled up in a magnificent Persian carpet and delivered by two stalwart Arabs as a gift to be laid at the feet of the lady. The Arabs unrolled the heavy cocoon. Loti, half smothered, emerged. Sarah screamed with laughter. And after that, the author of Madame Chrysantheme was a regular guest. Well, I'm happy about that for him. As at Belle Isle, Bernhardt was a gracious hostess, and occasionally a childish one. Jules Renard, whose large journal is a goldmine of Belle Epoque chit-chat, wrote of their first meeting. He was taken by Rostand, and when they arrived, luncheon had already started. As they entered the dining room, Madame rose from her chair and in a voice joyful, young, and adorable said, "Oh, how happy I am! He's just what I thought he'd be, isn't he, Rostand? Monsieur, I am your admirer." Bernard was like a schoolboy with his first crush. "I already have a great gratitude in my heart for her, a desire to admire, to love her, and the fear of letting myself go." And in another entry he states, "I would follow her to the end of the earth, with my wife." At table he sat on the hostess's right and was so odd he couldn't open his mouth even when a serving man took away his napkin. He did everything wrong, ate his meat with his fruit knife, and placed his sucked asparagus stems on his knife rest. Conversation got around to the subject of palmistry, and Sarah picked up Renard's hand to study it. To his dismay, he saw that his nails were rather dirty. Then Maurice Bernhardt upset a vase of flowers, inundating Renard with water, and at that Sarah dipped her fingers into the spilled water and rubbed his forehead while she screamed with laughter, which for some reason seems to have delighted Renard. After that, they returned to the first-strewn salon. Their hostess held forth about the things she had always wanted to do: scale mountains, write poetry, compose music. These wistful yearnings were cut short by the entrance of her newest pet, one of 4 pumas she'd just purchased. It was brought in on the end of a leash and introduced to the guests one at a time. When the creature sniffed at Edmund Harricourt's watch fob, the poet closed his eyes and appeared to go into deep prayer. After this, 2 ferocious-looking mastiffs bounded in but turned out to be playful puppies. Bernhardt winds up his account of the day by saying that, as he left, he didn't look for his hat. It happened to be on his head, but left serenely carrying away someone else's. Most of the Boulevard Prairie gatherings were gaily informal. I know I'm saying that wrong. Prairie, that does not anywhere near the French pronunciation. I should look it up, but life goes by so fast and I forget as soon as I close the book. So most of the Boulevard, something much prettier than prairie gatherings, were gaily informal. It never bothered Madame Sarah if she made any social blunder. On one occasion, realizing that she had placed a prominent banker at table directly opposite his ex-wife, she forestalled any embarrassment by announcing cheerfully, "You 2 have just been divorced, haven't you? What a lot you must have to tell each other." Bernhardt's cooks may have come and gone continually, but her other servants seem to have stayed on with unwavering loyalty in spite of their employers' disregard of their paydays. I have an opinion about that. Sometimes she'd be weeks, even months late with their salaries. Then she'd give them lump sums with added bonuses as compensation. Her maids must have had their problems. They had to put up with Madame's sudden rages, which were invariably followed by baffling gestures of contrition. After screaming at one, even shaking her in violent fury, she'd all at once assume the expression of a repentant child and present her with a brooch, a bracelet, or some other expensive and quite unsuitable gewgaw. Old Emile, the major domo who had come as an 18-year-old houseboy and had remained for 45 years, was long past his usefulness. With age, he became deaf, somewhat senile, semi-intoxicated, and chronically somnolent. He'd take up his post on a chair in the foyer, go into a profound doze, and if he were roused to announce some caller, would growl, stretch and shuffle off, muttering imprecations. At Belle Isle, Emile was entrusted with the marketing. The old boy would fill the farm wagon with provisions enough to feed a regiment. Much of it subsequently went to waste. More than once, when a suspiciously strong-smelling piece of meat was brought to the table, Emile received a well-aimed biff on the head with a flying roll, and he'd barely make it into the kitchen before the meat followed the roll. Sarah was well aware of Emile's complete inefficacy, but she kept him on like some crotchety old relative with whom she found herself saddled. Madame Sarah's watchdog for many years was a fussy little bald-headed man with a walrus mustache named Pitou, who acted as secretary, courier, and general whipping boy. Pitou was exasperating, stubborn, and rather idiotic. His lengthy excuses for innumerable blunders he committed were more irritating than the blunders themselves. Often, when his mistress could no longer endure the high-pitched voice explaining ad infinitum some ridiculous oversight, Pitou would be the target for some projectile, a paperweight, and once even an inkwell. Oh, what a mess. But Pitou was adept at either dodging or keeping a half-open door between himself and the barrage, and all the time he continued to explain. Pitou devoted his drab life to Madame Sarah. He argued with her. Sometimes they fought with the spitfire of a couple of tomcats, but he stayed on and she put up with him. Lysiane Bernhardt tells of the occasion when her grandmother sent the stubborn little man on a special mission to Aix-la-Chapelle for the purpose of delivering a letter by hand to an important functionary of the town. The regular post would have served just as effectively, but now and then Sarah enjoyed making a gesture in 18th century courier style. Pitou boarded a train, got off at Aix, and found the house of the functionary, who proved not to be home. At that, he put a stamp on the letter, dropped it in a mailbox, and returned to Paris cheerfully confident that his mission had been accomplished. After Sarah Bernhardt's leg amputation, she entrusted Pitou with all her papers, letters, notebooks, contracts, and programs to put in order and file in an expensive cabinet she had purchased for their storage. Pitou spent weeks over the job, then one day proudly informed his employer that everything was in meticulous order. She could peacefully face posterity. Sarah, who had no intentions of facing posterity just yet, ordered him out of the room. When Liziane was gathering material for her book, Sarah Bernhardt, Ma Grand-Mère, directly from great and wanted information about the siege of Paris and the Odeon ambulance, her grandmother called for Pitou to get her diaries and letters written at that period out of the filing cabinet. They should be, she said, under G for guerre. After an interminable wait, Pitou returned in a state of extreme agitation and announced that he'd been able to find only Madame's papers relating to the recent 1914 war. Sarah then yelled at him to look under the A's for ambulance, which proved as fruitless as the O's for Odeon, or the B's for bombardments. Sarah was on the point of hopping into the adjacent library for the purpose of assassinating Pitou when, with a cry of triumph, he appeared brandishing the 1870 documents. "My naturellement," he explained. "I had them under M's for malwares, misfortunes. Along with your fire in the Rue Aubert, your mother's death, your marriage to M. de Mala." His listing was interrupted by a hurtling vase of flowers which, barely missing his head, crashed on the wall beyond. As with infuriating persistence, Pitou droned on the dismal category of malheurs. 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 It looks like bad hours. Yeah. For all the exasperation he caused her, Madame Sarah seemed to feel the need of Pitou. In Paris, he was ever at her beck and call to perform the duties she imposed on him, and stubbornly determined to do them his way. On tour, he aired her dogs, ran countless errands for her, and kept her accounts. He looked after her finances. When the chamois bag or the brass-bound strongbox came near overflowing with gold coins, it was he who took the surplus to a bank to have exchanged into bills. One time in San Francisco, driving in a taxi from the station up that precipitous hill to the Fairmont Hotel, Madame ordered Pitou to close up a window. Pitou leapt to obey and yanked at the wrong handle, thereby opening one of the doors. Sarah then ordered him to tell the driver to stop, but Pitou stubbornly kept hold of the handle in a frantic struggle to swing the door shut. This ended with him swinging out with the door and landing on the street. The famous strongbox also swung out and exploded on the corner of California and Powell, and gold coins shot forth, rolling every which way. A few disappeared down the open slots for the cable cars. Sarah screamed. Pitou gibbered endless explanations, and shopkeepers emerged to help gather up bits of the golden shower. On sleeper jumps, after the star had got to bed, it was Pitou's nightly duty to hear her read the lines of a role. Sometimes she would add a new play to her already formidable repertory, and she had an idea that relaxing on her 5 pillows and drowsily murmuring the words would subconsciously fix them in her memory. Although it is a matter of record that Sarah Bernhardt was never known to forget a line, she was not beyond interloping a line of her own if something went wrong in a scene. Once during a performance of Phaedra, a sudden icy draft blasted across the stage, and in perfect Racinian Alexandrine she said, "If someone doesn't close that door, I shall come down with pneumonia before the end of the act." Then continued letter perfect with the text, and the audience never knew the difference. To be sure, it was an American audience. Although that's funny. Okay, going back to the beginning, with knowing it's an American audience, and then so she screamed, "If someone doesn't close that door, I shall come down with pneumonia before the end of the act," in French. So the audience had no idea what she had said. By 1910, the diseased knee was causing her untold anguish, not only in one spot, but up and down her entire leg. She described it as an animal gnawing my nerves and tendons. It hampered her movements on stage, and she was frequently obliged to lean for support on furniture, solid pieces of scenery, or some steady arm or shoulder. At home, she was considerably curtailed in her physical activity. She started cutting down her menagerie because of her young granddaughters, who came almost daily to visit her and were in the habit of running all over the house. She gave away her pumas as being too dangerous and her monkeys because, as she put it, they were too exhibitionist. During their growing years, Lysiane and Simone Bernhardt were a constant delight to her, and she to them. Impossible as it was for Sarah Bernhardt not to act off stage as well as on, there was no sham to her family devotion, and her love for her grandchildren was almost equal to that which she lavished on their father. Several times a week, she'd take them for lovely long drives in the Bois, stopping off for an ice at the Cascades. She'd give them picnics in her garden and often entertain them and their playmates after a matinee in her dressing room, delighting their hearts and upsetting their stomachs with babas, petit fours, and further delicious indigestibles sent in from a nearby patisserie. Sasha Guitry was always invited to Madame Sarah's children's party at Christmas. In his book, If Memory Serves, he recalled the fabulous tree blazing with 100 candles and, around it on the floor, 50 presents for 50 young guests. Sarah would hold out a grab bag from which each child would draw a number indicating a present. Oh, just like we do at work. He also recalled that through some trick of prestidigitation, she always saw to it that Simone and Lysiane pulled numbers for the best presents. Sasha Guitry often came to young people's luncheons in the Boulevard Prairie, as did Edmond Rostan's son Maurice. These were gay occasions during which Madame Sarah kept her small guests amused, often in squeals of mirth. Rostand remembers one child asking Madame if her hair were naturally curly, and Madame pouring a glass of Hydestock monopole onto her head to prove it was. When Maurice Bernhardt's delicate wife, Turca, died, Simone and Lysiane moved in to live with great, capital G. If Sarah was an ardently loving grandmother, she was also a good disciplinarian and a stimulating influence in their development. She instilled in them some of her extraordinary energy, taught them never to be idle, always to be creating something with their minds or their hands. During the rare periods when she was not completely tied up with her theater or a tour, she took them on trips about the country, or even as far as Switzerland in her elegant, chugging Daimler. For Bernhardt was an early motor enthusiast, and every evening she'd call on the girls to recount what they had seen and learned during the day.